Okay, so good morning. So today we're going to begin our discussion of the study group of the Spirit's book. And I just wanted to begin saying, prefacing that uh, although we're showing some material here, I'd really like this to be a discussion. Like people ask questions because the Spirit's book being the core of the Spiritist doctrine, it is very important for us to kind of try to get a clear understanding of what's in that book. So the idea is to read it cover to cover um, and try to, how do you say, like to detail all the information. I mean, all that we can grasp, because it's going to be a lot more than we don't realize. But as much as we can to get out of it um, the information that it contains, and make sure that all of us are on the same page and understand. And just to begin, I think I'm in the wrong place here. Yeah. Okay. So just for us to begin, this, as we mentioned last week, the Spirit's book is a core of the Spiritist doctrine. It was written um, in 4 parts, right? It contains 1,019 questions and answers, and it is um, divided in four parts or 4 books, depending on sub-books. The first part talks about the first causes, and it contains 75 questions and answers. It talks about God and infinity. It talks about God, the attributes of God, and proofs of the existence of God. It goes a little bit about pantheism, and then talk about the general elements of the universe, about spirit and matter, the properties of matter, and the universal space. Then there is a chapter about the creation of worlds. Talks a little bit about the population of the earth and discusses the biblical Genesis. And then the 4th chapter talks about the vital principle. And then about organic and inorganic life and being, life and death, and also about intelligence and instinct. Then the second part talks about, thank you, Moema, thanks so much. I always forget about this. Talks about the spirit world. And it's 542 questions about the nature of the spirits, about the process of incarnation, right? The death or the return to the spirit world. Talk about the multiple lives or reincarnation. And there is a chapter that's a discussion about considerations on multiple lives. Then the life on the spirit world. What the spirits do, or the choice of their trials, the relation. I know it's very, very small to read, but just to give an idea. Then there's a whole chapter about returning to the physical life, or being born on the physical world. The preparation, the union of the body and the soul, about the process of fusion of the physical body with the perispirit during infancy. So there's a chapter about death, there's about a chapter about being born, and there's a chapter about the kind of in-between, which is the emancipation of the soul, which is a state in which we are not completely separated of the physical body. That would mean death. But we have a partial separation that happens either physiologically, every night we go to sleep, or in some certain states, some mediumistic states. So there's a discussion about that also. There's a whole chapter about how the spirits intervene on our daily lives, on the physical world, and then occupations and missions of the spirits, and about the 3 kingdoms, the kingdom of mineral and plants, animal and humans, and then a chapter about metempsychosis. Then there is a chapter, the part about moral laws that Danny talked to us about a couple of weeks ago, and he divides this in 12 chapters. The first one talks about the divine law, which is unique, it's one, but then he breaks this divine law into 10 of its core aspects: law of adoration, labor, reproduction, self-preservation, destruction, society, progress, equality, law of freedom, and law of justice, love, and charity. And then the final chapter talks about moral perfection, the characteristics of moral perfection. And the last part of the book talks about hopes and consolations, and Kardec discusses the current hopes and consolations, like while we are incarnated, earthly joys and sorrows, and the future joys and sorrows, what will happen to us after we go back, and upon what depends our future happiness or our future sorrows. So we're gonna hopefully go through these 4 parts. Each of those parts was further developed in, as I said last week, in another book. The first part, Kardec expanded and gave origin to the Genesis. The second part about the spirit world was developed in the Medius book, which is one of the most complete guide of for those who try to or wish to exercise the communication with the spiritual world and the physical world. The third part, the moral laws, was expanded in the book called The Gospel According to Spiritism, and the fourth part, Hopes and Consolations, in the book that's called Heaven and Hell. Again, this is not like the books don't contain a repetition of the questions. It's not the same, but expanded concepts and thoughts on that same nature that are contained on the initial part of the Spirit's book. So those are the 4 initial or main points of books of the Spiritist codification, plus the Spiritist magazine, right? The 12 years of Spiritist magazine. So we're going to begin, of course, with the introduction. Many people skip the introduction and go to the first question. You know, the first list of questions: what is God? But the introduction and the prolegomena are really, really important, because here he sets the expectations for what the reader is going to encounter on the book, and also laid out very specific foundations, which is the definition of the words, the main keywords he's going to use throughout the entire work. So, anyone want to read? Or maybe because of the audio, it's better for those who are listening for me to read. So this first part is divided in little sections or areas. In the first one, he says, new words are needed to convey new ideas clearly and to avoid the inevitable confusion that ensues from using the same term for expressing different concepts. So he's straight away saying, hey, I want to explain why he created new words, and why is that he thought that was needed. Because the words spiritual, spiritualist, and spiritualism have each a given meaning that is specific. At that time, those words were currently used, and they had that proper meaning. To attribute a new meaning to those words by applying it to Spiritism merely increases the number of cases of ambiguity that already exist. In actuality, spiritualism is the opposite of materialism. Anyone who believes that something more than matter exists inside of us is a spiritualist. But this doesn't necessarily mean that they believe in the existence of spirits or their communication with the physical world. It is with this distinction in mind that we avoid the use of spiritual and spiritualism, and instead use Spiritist and Spiritism to describe the later belief. So whoever is not materialist is a spiritualist, right? Or believes in the spiritualist doctrine. From those, a set of those who have this particular faith or set of principles, which is the Spiritism, are called to be distinct: Spiritists, or who believe in Spiritism. Those words indicate their origin and root meaning and have the advantage of being perfectly clear and understandable. Therefore, we reserve the word spiritualism for its commonly accepted meaning, right? The central principle of Spiritism, or the Spiritist doctrine, is the relationship of the physical world with spirits, or beings that inhabit the invisible world. We refer to the adherents and supporter of Spiritism as Spiritists, the people who practice it, right? So we are Spiritists, but we are also spiritualists, right? A special kind of spiritualists, right? In particular, the Spirit's book contains the principles of Spiritism. In general, it is associated with spiritualist school, of which it presents one perspective. So is it clear? It's saying, you know, the Spiritism is a spiritualist doctrine. So in particular, this book talks about Spiritism, but it is a spiritualist doctrine. Under the umbrella of spiritualism. And then he says, this is why spiritualist philosophy appears on the top of the title page. So if you open the Spiritist book, on the first page, the first two words is spiritualist doctrine. And then you have the title of the book. So can you go to the first page there? So here, right on the top, spiritualist philosophy, and then the Spiritist book. To say that, you know, this book talks about Spiritism, which is under the umbrella of a spiritualist belief. Another word that must be defined is soul, because it is the cornerstone of every moral belief system, and due to the lack of clear-cut definition, it has been the subject of many controversies. The differences in opinion concerning the nature of the word soul directly stems from the plethora of meanings attributed to this word. Again, he's referring to a perfect language would have an unique term for every idea or concept, thus avoiding many debates and arguments and misinterpretations would be impossible. But we don't have a perfect language. The spirits keep telling us, every chance they get, they said, due to the imperfection of the human language, we cannot explain this. So he's going to talk about these different concepts that the word soul has across time. For some, they define soul as a principle of organic life, that which gives life to organic beings, with no existence of its own and ending with the life of the physical body. According to this belief, otherwise known as materialism, the soul is an effect and not the cause, meaning whatever the chemical reactions will produce life, they generate this soul. Whatever gives the property of an organic being, like that plant being alive, when that plant ceases, all those reactions cease to exist, the soul is gone. Right? So the soul itself is not the cause, it's the effect, right, of matter. Others believe that the soul is the principle of intelligence, the universal agent of which its being absorbs a portion. According to this theory, there is only one soul for the entire universe that distributes sparks of itself to all beings that are intelligent. When these beings die, each of those sparks returns to the common source and rejoins the general whole, just as a stem and rivers flow back to the ocean from which they originally were produced. Is it clear that? Although this opinion differs from the previous belief in that there is something more than matter that resides in us. So it's a little bit, it's a step, right? In the first one, what they call soul is only a property of matter, like color, density. So here, no, people say, oh, there's something else that survives this disaggregation. Something came from this unique soul, inhabited each one of those living beings, and then it goes back. But, let me find here. And it continues to exist even after our death. However, practically speaking, it is as if nothing remained of us after death, since all sense of individuality is lost, and all perception of our identity is also lost, right? So if whatever our soul is go back and fuses with a whole and loses its individuality, whatever we are, each one of us, is lost, right? So according to this theory, the universal soul is God, and each being is a fragment of the Supreme Being. This is a variation of pantheism. right? Is it clear? Any questions about? And finally, according to others, the soul is a moral being, distinct and independent of matter, and which preserves its individuality after death. This interpretation of the word soul is unquestionably the most widely accepted, because the idea of a being surviving the body is an instinctive belief independent of all teachings, evidence of which may be found across all nations, ethnic groups, religions, regardless of the degree of civilization. This doctrine, which dictates that the soul is the cause and not the effect, is supported by spiritualists, right? So this is what you're talking about, that there is something in us that is the real us, because if the real us was the physical body, we will be destroyed when we die, right? So this thing survives, and it keeps its individuality. That thing is, you can call it the way you want. So we're now using the word soul to describe it. Without delving into the actual merits of these opinions, and only taking into consideration the linguistic aspect, these three applications of the word soul derive from three distinct ideas, which require a different term, right? Soul, therefore, has a triple meaning. The word soul, right, has a triple meaning, and is used by each ideology according to the different meaning it attaches to that word. The fault really lies in the fact that human languages have only one word to convey three different ideas. To avoid the confusion that naturally ensues from using the same word to express three different ideas, the meaning of soul must be limited to only one of them. Right? It is irrelevant to each idea it is attributed, provided that the choice is clear, clearly understood, and clearly agreed upon. In our opinion, Kardec is saying, in our opinion, the most logical action would be to attribute the word soul to its most widespread and commonly understood meaning, which is why, and then he says, in this book from now on, that's what I'm going to mean by soul. We use soul to indicate the material and individual being residing within us that survives the body. So here he clearly lays out the definition for the entire work of what soul is. When he says of the word soul, that's what he's meaning. Even if this being did not actually exist, and were only a figment of our imagination, a specific term must be needed to talk about it, right? Given the lack of a specific term for each of the other two ideas, we then use vital principle, the term vital principle, to define the material and organic life that is common to all living beings, right? That will be the idea of the second soul, right, that he mentioned. Regardless of its source, from plants to humankind. As life can exist when a being does not have ability to think, the vital principle is a distinct and independent element from the property of thinking, right? So he's separating soul being the individuality. There's this other thing that is common to all living things, which was called the animal soul in the past, right, in the other definition. But now he's saying, from now on, we're going to call this vital principle. And then he goes on, the word vitality or vitality would not express the same idea. According to some, the vital principle is a property of matter produced whenever matter is found under specific conditions. In contrast, most believe that it resides in a special fluid, universally distributed, of which each being absorbs a portion during life. This effect can be compared to how inert bodies absorb light. This is the vital fluid, which is generally regarded as being the same as the animalized electric fluid, also known as magnetic fluid, nervous fluid, and so on. And a parenthesis here, 1856, 7. Some of these terms, the words, we don't use the same meaning today, right? Besides the different interpretations of the same word at a given time, there's a variation across time, right? So magnetic for us today doesn't have the same understanding of what magnetic had to them at that time. So you say it's He used the word magnetic. Today we have a very specific understanding of what magnetic is, right? Related to physics. Here, um, it was mainly related to, in this context, to the what they call magnetic fluid, which was whatever was used or transmitted during the hypnosis states, or what is the name again? I blanked on this. Franz Mesmer. Oh my God, now I blanked out. Which is today is called hypnotism, basically, right? So that influence that the magnetizer transmitted to the person subjected to the magnetism, that's what they call the magnetic fluid, which has nothing to do with a magnet, right? That today we understand in physics. So, is it clear? Okay, questions. We have questions. Danny, change the sound.
Versus soul for humans. I'm understanding biofluids as something that you can see definitely in animals and plants or other, non-human level intelligent living beings. So the difference between those two, and then is the magnetic fluid the vital fluid?
No, he's saying the vital fluid is sometimes called with other names. Animalized electric fluid or magnetic fluid. So those are synonyms for vital fluid. Yeah. Yeah. He said, from now on in this book, I'm going to call all of this, I'm going to call vital fluid, right? And then he's going to...
The soul.
Right.
For humans, like.
Right. So the next paragraph, I think, goes into that. So regardless of the facts proven by observation, one fact proven by observation is certain. Organic beings possess an intrinsic force that, for as long as it's present, produces the phenomenon of life. Right? There's something in everything that's alive that, as long as that thing has that something, it exhibits the property of being alive. All organic beings possess this physical life, which is independent of intelligence and thought. Intelligence and thought are faculties belonging to certain organic species, not all of them. And among those gifted with intelligence and thought, only one possesses a special moral sense that renders them indisputably superior to others, human beings. Here he makes the distinction that you were asking for. So a plant is alive, right? Because it's alive, it possesses something that gives that property of being alive, of reproducing, growing, but it doesn't yet exhibit the aspects of intelligence, right? So that being is imbued with this something that he now is calling here vital fluid, because anything that is imbued with vital fluid displays the property of being alive, right? But it doesn't have this other characteristic that is restricted to some organic forms, namely animals and humans, right? Which is intelligence and some degree of thought. But not all of those animals, for instance, who display some degree of intelligence. We can see, like in dogs, cats, horses, the clear display of intelligence, right? They know, they learn things, but they don't have moral understanding yet. They don't have self-awareness. They don't have free will. Those characteristics are restricted so far to one species, which is the human species. And that's what we will define as the soul, right? It's that immaterial part of us, or actually us, right, that displays that property of being individual, being intelligent, is the seat of intelligence, and survives after death. Then he says, Because it has multiple meanings, the term soul exclude neither materialism nor pantheism. Spiritualists themselves understand soul to have one of the first two definitions, without denying the distinct immaterial being to which it would give another name. This word does not represent an opinion, rather than is a versatile term defined by each one according to his or her own school of thought. That is why there is an endless dispute about the soul, right? Its meaning. Confusion so how could you avoid confusion? You could create three different words to define those three different concepts. But you could also avoid confusion by adding a descriptive term when using the word soul. In the three cases defined above, that would specify the perspective or the manner in which we are applying it. This word would be the generic, representing the principles of material life, intelligence, and moral judgment, each of which would be distinguished by a specific feature or characteristics. For example, the word gas. Sometimes you say nitrogen gas, oxygen gas, helium, hydrogen gas. It's all the same. They are all gases, but we are qualifying them differently by saying what type of gas they are, right? Hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen are all gases, but they're different gases. So we could say X soul, Y soul, or Z soul to represent, like just add a qualifier to the word soul, right? Therefore, we could say, and perhaps it would be the best approach, to say vital soul for the principle of material life, intellectual soul for the principle of intelligence, and a spiritual soul for the principle of our individuality that survives after death. And then he says, this is merely a question of words, but it's crucial for ensuring clarity and understanding. In this case, the vital soul will belong to all organic beings, plants and animals and humans. The intellectual soul would specifically belong to animals and humans, and the spiritual soul would belong to humankind alone. Does it make sense? Did you clarify a little bit? So he's trying to separate. He said, I could have chosen to call this in any of these ways, but he had to choose one. So he picked to keep using the most common acception of the word, or the definition of the word soul. And from now on, we will understand when he mentions soul, that is the immaterial being that is present within each one of us, that survives the destruction of the physical body. And then he says, all of this that I'm talking about is important to be explicit in regard to this point, because Spiritism is naturally based on the existence of a being inside us that is completely independent of matter and that lives on after the body has succumbed to death. The word soul appears frequently throughout his work. Therefore, it is critical to define the meaning that we attach to it and to avoid any potential disputes or misunderstandings. Having said that, we can now move along to the main object of this preliminary explanation. So this is a couple of pages just trying to explain what he means by soul. And that is, there is a mark of a very good teacher, right? So he tries to avoid beforehand all the confusion that could arise when in chapter 15, in the middle of the book, somebody sees the word soul. What do you mean by that? Right? So this is a key word we're using throughout the whole book. And he takes some time to make sure that everybody's on the same page from the beginning of the book and what he means when he uses this word. Any questions? Yeah.
So can I associate material life to vital intelligence, intelligent one, and then moral judgment ultimately being the...
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Would you please repeat your comment or question, please?
Can I associate then material life to the vital soul, the intelligence section within that line to the intelligent soul, and then the moral judgment being the actual soul or spiritual soul?
Yeah. That's exactly what he's saying. So, and he's going to have a whole chapter on the first part about the vital fluid, right? Because it is what gives what produces the phenomena of life, right? What gives any living thing the property of being a living thing. Actually, we're gonna go and we're gonna see this on the Media's book when he's talking about the physical phenomena that inorganic objects can be given a temporary life when they are imbued with vital principle. And that occurs in in physical phenomena of movement, materialization, in which, in his time, the turning tables that we talked about last week, what makes those tables go up and move and spell things is not like a magnetic field or electric field or some physical force that lift them, like an arm that go and lift them. Is that they are temporarily imbued with vital fluids, and thus temporarily being alive, they obey the will of the spirit who is producing the phenomenon, either be the medium or the communicating spirits. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it's exactly that. It's a fluid that by itself is not life itself, but when combined with some other form of matter, produces the phenomenon of being alive. Oops, going forward. Okay. Third, so he says, Spiritism, as with all new concepts and belief systems, has both adherent supporters and staunch detractors. We will attempt to counter, and then he explains. Now we're going to talk about the many objections that people say about Spiritism, formulated by its critics. We will scrutinize the merit of the reasoning, not make a judgment call, but the merit of the reasoning, if there's logic makes sense or not, of such criticism is based, admitting beforehand that we will not be able to convince everyone, because some people believe that enlightenment was intended solely for them. Those is, in some other work, he calls those who are systematic deniers. I think in the Media's book, right? In the beginning introduction of the Media's book, those people who negate by system, they say this cannot be, and there's nothing you can do, and it will not convince me. To talk to those people is like wasting time, because they're not open to think in another way. We're not claiming that we will be able to convey or sway everybody, but we are primarily addressing those who, without clinging to prejudice or preconceived ideas, honestly seek truth. We will prove to these individuals that our critics' objections are the consequence of a failure to observe all the facts thoroughly, yielding a predictably superficial and hasty conclusion. So here he gives like, it's not that they want to do this, it's just that they weren't able to observe. And also he points here also to the scientific aspect, right, of Spiritism, which is observation of facts, use of logic, and deduction of the causes based on the effects. So first, we will briefly summarize the progressive series of phenomena that gave birth to Spiritism. And we talked about some of these last week. But the first fact observed was the movement of aerial objects, commonly known as table turning or table tipping. So table turning or table tipping refers to a phenomenon that started in 1848 with the Fox sisters. This is a footnote this is not a part of the book. It's a footnote by the USSC, United States Spiritist Federation, on that edition. Leah, Margaret, and Kate in Hydesville, New York, USA. The participants sat around a table to communicate with spirits. They placed their hands on the table that had letters used to spell a message, much like the Ouija board of today. Just an explanation of. So this phenomenon, first observed in the United States, or more accurately, reintroduced in that country as history proves that it can be traced back to the earliest periods of antiquity, was accompanied by strange occurrences, such as unusual noises, knocking sounds with discernible cause, and other similar incidents. This phenomenon rapidly spread to Europe and the rest of the world. Initially, it was met with skepticism, but the sheer volume of occurrences soon made it impossible to question its authenticity. I don't know if you remember when we were talking about the Quakers last week, that there was this guy who it was a historian. He divided that occurrence in three phases. The first one, calling attention to the phenomena to prove it was real. The second one, the teaching phase. And the third one, the practice, the practical use of the. And here he's saying pretty much the same. This was the first phase, calling attention to the phenomena, showing that there was something that was doing those tables move that has an intelligent principle behind. If the phenomena in question had been limited to the movement of physical objects only, it could have been explained by solely physical cause, just by a physical cause. After all, we are far from being fully aware of the secret agents of nature, not even fully understanding all the properties of those which are known to us. For example, electricity is not only increasing the resources it offers to humankind on a daily basis, but it appears to be on the brink of shedding new light on science. Subsequently, it could not be conclusively ruled out that electricity, modified by given circumstances or some unknown agent, might be the cause of the movements. Right? He's just saying we don't know everything yet. It could be that those tables are levitating because of some electrical form modified somehow. The presence of multiple individuals increasing the intensity of the action, because this was sometimes observed. If you had many people, sometimes the phenomena produced with a greater intensity. So he's saying the presence of this observation could be seen as a battery, right? That could be viewed as forming a battery, the power of which was in proportion to the number of its plates, its components. So the more plates a battery has, the more capacity to accumulate electricity. So one could say the more people present on a physical effects meeting, the greater will be the effect, right? However, sometimes the movements could be produced with much more grandiose or intensity with just one child than with 10 adults. So this rule was not always the case. Then he goes, the circular movement of the table was in no way shocking or unexpected. After all, circular movement is frequently found in nature. The stars and planets of the universe all move in circles. We know ellipses today. Therefore, it seems possible that the movement of the tables was a small-scale impulse or reaction to the movement that moves the universe, right? Some cause, unknown up to now, could accidentally produce a current for small objects that will be parallel to those forces that propel the planets into orbit, right? So the table's spinning around. The problem is, however, not only was the movement not always circular, it was often erratic, with the table sometimes being violently shaken, toppled, carried around in various directions, lifted off the ground and held up in the air, all contrary to the known laws of static, electricity, and gravity, right? Because if you put something in movement, unless you apply a force, it will keep going in the same direction. Despite all of this, even though nothing occurred that could not be explained by the force of an invisible physical agent, it is not uncommon to see electricity topple buildings, uproot trees, hurl extremely heavy objects far distances through either the force of attraction or repulsion. So he's saying, even if this goes against all our expectations, it could be that just electricity was, explaining this erratic phenomena. The knockings and other unusual noises, assuming that it's caused by something other than ordinary wood expansion or any other accidental cause, could be very well manufactured by the accumulation of a mysterious fluid. It has been observed, after all, that electricity is capable of producing the loudest sounds. Right? Like just think about thunder, right? It's just an electrical discharge. Up to this point, and this is very important, everything could be considered as merely being an effect of physics or physiology. Like all of these things that he mentioned up now, you didn't have to go to any other explanation beyond what was partially known by a physical cause. Without venturing outside of those two fields of science, this phenomena generated a subject that was quite worthy of serious studies and scrutiny by scholars. He was saying, even though you didn't have a soul there, it was just purely physical phenomena, it was a very interesting thing for people to study at the time, right? Why was this investigation never performed? As difficult it may be to admit, the complete disregard of the scientific and academic world was based on something that once again demonstrates the superficiality of human minds. First of all, the ordinary nature, the common nature of the basis for these first experiments played a decisive role in its derision. The influence exerted by a simple word in regards to even the most serious matter is incredible. Without considering the possibility that this movement could be produced by any object, the use of tables was automatically associated with it. Remember, the general term used in Europe, it was table turning or table dancing, right? Dance of the tables. This deduction was undeniably made because a table is the most convenient object with which to experiment, and because people can sit around the table more easily than any other piece of furniture. However, people who pride themselves on their intellect are sometimes foolish, and one can see how many leading minds may have considered it beneath them to give any credibility to what was commonly known as table dancing. Is it clear what he's saying? He's saying a lot of scholars of the day wouldn't dignify themselves on studying table dancing just because it was called table dancing, because it was widespread and because it was happening in the kitchen of his grandmother or something or whatever, you know. This was not considered to be serious enough as a phenomenon to study. If that had been observed by Galvani, had been discovered by an illiterate or uneducated person and christened by a ridiculous name, it probably would have been relegated to a position alongside with the divining rods. What scientists would not, in that case, have considered offensive to study frog dancing? Do people know who Galvani was? Galvani was a physiologist, Italian physiologist, and he discovered, actually today he's considered the father of bioelectricity or biomagnetism. He discovered that if he touched the legs of a dead frog with an electrical current, the legs would twitch, would contract. And basically, this led to the discovery that there were structures in the organic bodies called nerves that conduced electrical impulses and led those impulses to the muscles contracted and produced the various movements in our bodies. He was the father of this field of physiology. And he's saying if somebody else had observed this phenomenon, like you playing with dead frogs' legs and they falling apart, like dancing apart, it could have been considered ridiculous enough to be dismissed. But that guy didn't. He went out to try to find the explanation and discovered, one of the laws of biology. So, nevertheless, a few individuals who were humble enough to admit that nature might not yet have revealed all her secrets to humankind attempted to investigate the matter. Right? A series of people, not only him, but other people, saw in the events that were happening more than just the distraction or the passatempo. How do I say passatempo in English? How do I say passatempo? Pastime that people were employing. However, as the phenomena did not always respond to their trials and were not always produced to their liking or according to their methods of experimentation, they reached an unfavorable conclusion. And this is also important because we keep saying, hey, Spiritism has a scientific aspect. So if it has a scientific aspect, or it should be reproducible, right? Because in science, truth comes from the reproducibility of experiments. If different groups can use the same methodology and get to the same results, This probably is observation of a natural law, right? So people try to do the same. The thing that they didn't realize is that they weren't they weren't only studying matter. There was something else there, which was the soul, which meant the seat of individuality of somebody else. That somebody else has their own free will, and they may not want to do or produce the phenomena they did yesterday. So the fact that reproducibility cannot be always found doesn't mean that it is not true, right? So he says, despite that conclusion, despite they saying, oh, this doesn't exist, the tables continue turning, and like Galileo, we can say, and yet it moves, right? And he was talking about the Earth going around the sun. We may further assert that the phenomena may have been produced to such an extent that we have accepted them. Opinions are now only divided with regards to their nature. So this is established fact. This was happening so often and everywhere that no one could question that the tables were levitating and moving and giving answers. The only question now is why? What's happening here, right? Can the effects of this phenomena are not always produced? I think this is, I may have. The effect of this phenomena are not always produced in exactly the same manner or according to the wishes and requirements of each individual observer. Be rational consider an argument against their veracity, right? The phenomena of electricity and chemistry, for example, are subject to certain conditions. Do we deny their existence simply because they do not occur when those conditions are not present? Right? It is shocking that certain conditions are necessary for the movement of objects by human fluid, or is that should not occur when the observer insists on producing it in accordance to one's whims, or is subjecting it to the laws of known phenomena without considering that new facts may result from the actions of the laws that are unknown to us, that are not known to us. In order to learn about such laws, the circumstances under which those occurrences are produced must be thoroughly studied. Such a study can only be completed through comprehensive, focused observation. And that's the core of the scientific part of Spiritism, the science part of Spiritism, right? An observational science, but that is not based on observing the material nature. It's based on observing, it's like social sciences that we have today, right? Observing interactions of human beings. The only difference being those human beings are unseen to us. Some will object that deception is often apparent. We first ask whether the challengers are positive that what they labeled as deception may not simply be facts for which they are not yet able to account, like a peasant who misconstructed the experiments of a physics professor for the tricks of an illusionist. Even if we admit that deception occasionally occurs in some cases, can it serve as a ground for denying the authenticity of all facts? Should we deny the existence of physics simply because some illusionists call themselves physicists? So that's another very important point, because and that happened here in the US a lot after the Fox sisters become very widely known. A lot of other people began to display mediumship abilities also, so that began to be very frequent, those types of meetings, but also there were a lot of charlatans claiming to have psychic abilities of mediumship abilities. And those people began to be discovered, right? And they were charlatans. And that label was applied to everyone. Similarly, the integrity of the individuals involved in these manifestations could be considered, as well as any interest that they may have in deceiving others. Could it be a joke? Yeah. A joke may be funny at first, but keep it up for too long and it becomes as tiresome for the hoaxer as for the victim. Years and years producing the same phenomena, anyone would be tired of doing that, right? To keep up with this joke for 10 years. Besides, a hoax that managed to be successfully carried out from one end to the earth to the other, among the most upright and educated minds, would be as extraordinary as the phenomenon in question, if not more. So we still have 5 minutes. This is not the whole this is just the first 4 items of the introduction. I think we're going to keep next month, but I would like to have some time for questions and answers. I know it's a lot of text, but I think it's important for us to go in detail about this introduction because it's very rich and prepares us to understanding the whole book better.